The other day I watched a video called Steve Albini discusses why he sticks with analog recording and mixing. I'll link to that video in the description. Mr. Albini made a great point about how we can easily go back to tape and listen back to it. Digital, on the other hand, not so much. That's why in this video I'm going to teach you how to properly archive your digital audio projects so that they can be easily played back and remixed well into the future. In the Steve Albini video, he talks about how digital has too many proprietary formats, and he's absolutely correct about that. Not all digital audio workstations, also known as DAWs, can read formats that were created with other DAWs. Plugin settings don't transfer very well. Plugins, including virtual instruments, may not be compatible with future software. You may lose or sell a license key for plugins. So the idea of proper session archiving is to get everything into a universal format that can be read by any program without relying on third-party software. First of all, any recorded files should be archived separately. You may want to remove any unused files such as takes that weren't good or parts of takes that weren't good in order to conserve hard drive space. This step may take the longest time unless you were very organized and labeled all your tracks from the very beginning. However, the mix session is a bit easier, at least with Reaper. First of all, you want to go up here, and this is actually a project that I'm able to do this in because we're not going to use this material. We're going to re-record it so I can safely do this. I'm going to go up to File, Save Project As, and then for this, I'm going to call it Raw Mix Archive. So I'll put it in this folder. Look at my folder structure, by the way. So I have the artist name. It's my friend Chris, and the song is called For Keeps. So I'll call this For Keeps Mix Archive. And I'm going to Control A, Control C, so that copies that name because I'm going to call it the same thing for the project itself. Now, the key thing is, down here, normally this isn't checked. It's checked because I just did it like the last time I was messing around with this. Check Move All Media into Project Directory. You could also copy it, but because I'm archiving everything, moving it makes more sense. So move all media into Project Directory, and I usually leave this unchecked. So, all right, save. And what that's going to do is all of these files now are going to be moved into that folder. So I'll bring that folder up right now under Windows Explorer. All right, so here it is now. See all my files that are in the session. You can't see them because they say offline. All these, which are FLAC files. Normally I use WAV files, but I had actually already archived these prior to this video recording. And you can see that all three of my files, it's 4 tracks, but 3 files. See, that's the same file. 3 files plus the project. And I'm working on that file right now. That's step number 2. So now I'm actually going to archive the processed mix stems. And the first step is actually one that you might not think about and one that you may already have on your project. But I typically don't do this, but for archiving I do. What I want to do is add a metronome track, also known as a tempo map, click source. So I want to go to Insert and go to Click Source under Reaper. Actually, I messed that up. Control Z, I need to add a track. So Control T, drag it up, and I'm going to call this For Keeps. And I already know if I look down here, my tempo is 141 beats per minute, and my time signature is 3/4. So I'm going to call it 141 BPM 3/4 signature. Now you got to remember, you're making this for somebody else or for you when you completely forgot how you archived your files. These files need to make sense. Okay? So we got that out of the way. That's our selected track. See how it's brighter than the rest of them? If it wasn't, see how it goes dark? So click that and go to the beginning, insert, click source. Now I have my click track, and if I solo it, you can hear it. If I let it go, if I mute it, it's gone.
1, 2, 3.
All right, cool. After you add your click source, you want to unmute it actually, because otherwise it won't save. So over here, I'm going to start by clicking and then dragging all the way to the left at the very beginning of the project. This step is super important because you don't want to start the end of your track like that. Because what'll happen is if you have a reverb tail or a delay tail, it won't be saved. So start at a few, like maybe a measure or two afterwards. Maybe even, I would say like 3 or 4 seconds, you should be good. Start it at the very end, or I should say, finish it at the very end, start it at the very beginning. Next up, we're going to go over to here, click that. Any track, actually, you can click and then press Control A to select all your tracks. See how they turn bright? This step is also very important, otherwise this next step won't work. All right, after we do that, we're going to go to File, Render. Oh, and by the way, if your tracks aren't labeled with something that makes sense, do that before this step. I've already done that. First up, we're going to change our render option to Stems Selected Tracks. Our render bounds is going to be changed to Time Selection. And then I'm going to call my directory Process Archive. And then file name is actually going to be deleted. And over here where it says wildcards, we're going to choose track. Technically $ track, but you'll understand. Next up, I want my output to be the same sample rate as my project, and that's 96 kilohertz, 96,000 hertz, whatever you want to call it. Channels stereo, we want to change this to 1x. You can either do online render. I do 1x offline because after I've mixed the song, I really don't want to hear it again. Resample mode, you can keep it at extreme. I typically don't have different sample rates in my projects because I don't want to add any extra CPU. But if you do have a track that isn't the same sample rate as your final format, then definitely choose extreme for the highest quality. Next up, I experimented with this option. You want to have this off, and the reason for that is, again, our goal is to make a bunch of tracks that we can easily drop into a new session, and it'll sound the same as if it was in this Reaper mix session. And unfortunately, this mono media does not detect, let's say if this, see how these are panned left and right a little bit? It doesn't detect that. It'll just make this a mono file, and it won't sound the same, unfortunately. So you got to leave that unchecked. And I don't have multi-channel tracks. Multi-channel refers to anything more than stereo, so I leave that unchecked as well. Now this is important. The output format, you want to have it either at WAV or WavePak lossless. I'll typically choose WAV because I don't mind large files, but if space is a premium, then absolutely choose WavePak. For now though, I'm going to choose WAV. Now if you do choose WavePak, I must say, make sure you choose the 32-bit it says 32 FP option, and then you want to have it at the very high slowest mode for your render time. But anyway, WavePak adds an extra dimension of complexity to your archive. And as stupid as this sounds, somebody might look at that file, which is labeled as a .wv file, and they might be like, what the F is that? So WAV is the most universal format, broadcast WAV to be exact, and that's why I choose that. I choose 32-bit floating point for my bit depth, and this option's checked because we might have large files. I typically don't have the project name in the broadcast wave data. You might want to check that though. I guess it doesn't hurt. And then click that if yours isn't already. I typically don't include the project tempo. I do something else instead. I don't include markers because that's just going to add again to more complexity. It can screw things up too. So I'll typically not include markers, but that's up to you. You may want to do that. I don't think it's necessary though for what we're doing. All right, now this I usually leave unchecked. And no. So all these options are good. All right, so see how it says render 7 files? And that's because I have 7 tracks, including the click, including the sends. That's important. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Your send track is important to do. All right, so I have all that ready. I'm going to render this out now. And because this is a 4-minute song, I'm actually going to do it full speed so I don't have to spend 4 minutes sitting here with you guys. All right, we're done. Now, if your DAW does not have an option like Reaper does, I feel sorry for you because it's a very nice option to have. If it doesn't, you unfortunately will need to go one by one, track by track, soloing, disable your FX on your main master channel, and render out one by one. I'm sorry, but that's just how it has to be if you're going to do a proper archive. Now, I just talked about the master channel, and yes, you want to actually not have any of the master channel plugins involved with your track. Reaper will not process the tracks through the master channel. As you saw, once I hit it off, it actually had clipped, and that's one reason why I export 32-bit floating point, but that's because I didn't have my brick wall limiter on. Now, the reason that I mix and master separately, just like they did in the old school days where they would send a mix down to a tape, and then that tape would go to a mastering engineer, is because of this reason, because of archiving. Now, what I'll do for my mastering session is I'll actually go, while I'm mixing, I have these plugins on typically, or I add them towards the end of the mix. Either way, that's what works for me. All I have to do is go to FX, save FX chain, and then name it. I'm going to censor these out because they have some customer names on them. I'll just call it, I'll call it For Keeps Master Track. All right, I saved that, and then when I load up a new Reaper session, I can just add those by going to FX, add FX chain, and there's For Keeps. And that'll add the same plugins that I already have. Very cool. Okay. So that also means, by the way, that you do need to do a separate mix down in Reaper at least. Again, with the FX off. So we're going to go to File, Render. Now we're going to change the renderer to Master Mix. And I'm going to call this For Keeps Final Mixdown. And you see it does go over, and that's fine because it's a floating point file. That's why I use floating point. Because if I use integer, regular old 24-bit or 16-bit, going over, clipping, is a bad thing. But clipping with floating point is perfectly fine. If you don't believe me, I'll put a link to a video that I did many years back that proved this. And so actually I'm going to hit the back button. You know what? I'm going to open this up. So here are all our files so far. All right, good little archive going on. It's quite large already, but that's fine. So I'm going to actually click this and copy the name because I'm going to need this in the next step, which is if you have virtual instruments. So we already have our virtual instruments saved as a broadcast WAV file. Okay, but we do want to maintain that MIDI data. Unfortunately, the MIDI data is actually embedded in the Reaper project. It's not an actual MIDI file that can be played in any other DAW. So we have to do another step, which is to go to File, Export Project MIDI, and then I'm going to, again, choose this time selection only, and we're going to, I only have one MIDI file, but the way I would handle this is putting this on a multi-track MIDI file, choosing all. I'm not going to embed the tempo map. These are all options I'm not 100% familiar with because I don't use virtual instruments, but you may want to choose these, you might not. I like to make my files as universal as possible, so I will typically not include a tempo map, and I'm not familiar with what a MIDI cue is, so you may or may not want to include these. So for this purpose, that'll be my file folder. And just like that, I have my MIDI file. It's so tiny. Okay, next up. This is actually something you could do earlier, you could do now. Either way, do it. We're going to go to File. We're going to go to Project Settings. And actually, I already have it noted here. This is incorrect. I don't know why I wrote 126 beats per minute. But in the notes, we can write anything we want. Now, I would include number 1, what the pan law is. And we can find that out by going over here to Advanced. And my pan law for this project is +0. And I could also write down my pan mode. And the other thing is, you need to make sure you know what your send, any of your sends. I only have one send on this project though. What is the pan law of your send? And I can find out by right-clicking right on this pan slider. Oops, I gotta hit that. I gotta hit cancel and then right-click it. And then see how it says override default track pan law. I could have had that selected, but I don't. But everything's 0, okay? Which is a good and a bad thing. 0 is what I chose, so 0 it is. In my notes, I'm going to write that, and then I could write something like, I could write my name. And email address. Phone number. Mix down date September 2016. Okay, so you can have all that stuff on here if you want, all right? And then the other what thing you want to do if you have Reaper or whatever DAW you have, there may be an option where it says show notes on project load so that anybody who opens this session file, this archived session file, this will come up immediately so that they know it's there, and that's always a good thing, all right?